No, I'm still on try now.
Don't worry,
It might be coming now.
numbers like travels or
No, it takes a bit.
like electrical.
We're gonna wait a couple
We'll
minutes.
wait a couple
No,
minutes
I'm
or
not
two, just
either.
because
I'm like,
I
quickly,
think
I'm
we're getting
Like,
more
prove
time.
that he
Here's
can.
it.
Can
Yeah.
Bill hear us?
Can you hear now?
Can you hear us
No.
now, Bill?
So I have to have my microphone
phone
on.
on.
But
I really hope this is live broadcasting. This would be really exciting for everybody to be out there.
Where is if your microphone's on? It's coming out.
But it has to be on because Bill can't hear it.
We're getting a relay.
You know what? This happened to me the other day.
This one?
This one?
No,
On your.
On my computer.
But
he didn't seem to
Bill
hear us.
can't hear me now.
He should be able to hear you from the speakers.
Can you hear me, Bill?
He's got to speak so we can pick him up on Zoom.
Can you see him?
I don't think he can hear us.
Can you see him on your screen now?
I can see him on my screen.
So can you give him sign language to
up, Dan?
speak?
You might be having
I'm gonna
a
check.
serious delay.
Yeah.
You know how sometimes you have that odd delay?
Even a minute sometimes, it's weird, like you can't.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like we ask a question and then we move on to somebody else and the person goes, yes. Go, "Oh,
Yeah,
Wait,
I can hear you now.
there we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, but I gotta turn off the audio entirely on mine. Okay. Can you hear us still?
Yes.
Okay, I think we got it now.
Perfect.
Alright, it's, you're the one not doing it?
No, last time we could hear the echo
Oh.
and so, yes.
Alright, so we are not kind of full on participants as far as I know. I don't know if are we expecting Bob or Chris?
No, Bob and Chris aren't making it tonight.
Oh, okay, so maybe
this is it,
we
yeah.
are getting close to full on participants. It's unusual for us to have more chairs than we need. We usually have the opposite problem. So I'm mostly just wasting time so I can pull the agenda back up. And then we can go ahead and get started. So, what did I just do? That wasn't good. It's great that people get to watch this on television.
They fast forward this part.
Yeah, just edit all of this out of the recording. All right, so we will call the meeting to order at 6:05. We'll round. So welcome to the January 31st, 2023 meeting of the Elementary School Building Committee 2. I will quickly review the agenda. We'll start with opening up the opportunity for public comment, and then we'll move into new business where we have some meeting minutes to approve. We'll do a couple of recaps. We have responded to the MSBA's comments on our latest submission, so we'll hear an update on that. We will recap the January 24th public forum feedback, and then we will do a review and discussion of design options. And then we will embark on part one of discussing the evaluation criteria that we're going to use to select a particular site option. Tonight we'll be focused on on-site and off-site topics, traffic, parking and on-site circulation, permitting and approvals, school future growth and flexibility, district operations and busing, public safety, site complexities, walkability, bikeability, and proximity to public utilities. Which were almost all bullet points that we heard about at the January 24th forum, so I think this is well timed. So we'll discuss the draft evaluation matrix and then recap the schedule with the goal of ending as close to 8 o'clock as possible. So first item is public comment, and we do not have anybody here currently for public comment, but we will open up the opportunity should a member of the public arrive late. So next we move on to meeting minutes approval. So we have a draft of meeting minutes from our January 17th, 2023 meeting. Does anyone have any edits, comments, or questions on those minutes? Okay,
January, did you say 23rd, 17th?
17th.
Yeah.
17th. Okay, if I'm not hearing any questions or comments,
Mr. Chairman, I move the accept the minutes as drafted for the meeting of 1/17.
okay, motion by Mike, is there a second?
Second?
Second by
Second.
Tiffany. We have a remote participating member tonight, so we're gonna do all of our votes by roll call. So Bill, we'll start with you.
Yes.
Mike,
Yes, sir.
Tiffany?
Yes.
Jagroot?
Yes.
And I am a yes, so it is unanimous.
Jen.
1, 2, 3, 4. What's that?
Jen?
Did I skip Jen?
That's all right. I'll be a yes too, John.
I'm sorry.
Just kidding.
So, yes, so it's unanimous 6. I was about to say 6-0, so I just assumed Jen voted yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Telepathic, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes we work like that.
So, it's unanimous and the minutes are approved. Luckily, we don't have any more votes tonight, so I won't do that again. Next is recap the response to MSBA comments. Jeff, I think I'm looking at you for this
Yep,
one.
absolutely. So we responded to the MSBA comments. I think I just realized I didn't send you the responses back in your meeting packet, so I will send that next time. We did give you the MSBA's response, but I did not resubmit back to you our responses back to the MSBA. So we'll put that in next week's packet. The comments were good. There was a lot of related to the educational plan, and since that time, the school administration has revised and updated that. They asked us to redline it and track changes so they could see exactly where the edits were made. And so that was sent back to this MSBA. If there are other revisions before we get to the end of the PSR, we'll just send that back and track changes as well. That's been received and accepted by the MSBA. A couple other things to note related to programs and cost and dollars are the eligible program spaces. So the good news is that they've agreed that the larger gymnasium and associated spaces is an acceptable item that will be eligible, because if they didn't, that's a large dollar space that would not be eligible. There's a few miscellaneous items that are ineligible, but they'll allow it to stay in, and we're working with the school department to see if they still need to retain those spaces as one small office, a book room, and the family resource room. And so we're going to review and evaluate the ed program and update that if necessary before the submission at the end of the month as part of the PSR at the end of February. But overall, the rest of it was acceptable, and there's feedback, and that will be included in your next week's packet.
Excellent. Questions? So I have one question. So on those small spaces that you talk about that are not necessarily eligible, they're not deemed not eligible for reimbursement.
Correct.
So what is it that pushes those into the not eligible for reimbursement?
Yep, excellent question. So the MSBA has a prescribed process where the number of students you have get entered into their program. It spits out the number of classrooms. It never works out perfectly with the number of classrooms that you need. So the other part I skipped over is they also accepted your larger classroom count. Because the number of grades, because of the multiplier, doesn't always spit out the right number of classrooms. So they also accepted the number of classrooms per grade. So that was an increase from their program. That spits out some special education sizes, the size of the gymnasium, the cafeterium, and other various elements to the building. Office spaces is folded under the administration, and the program spits out the size of the administration. So sometimes there's an assistant principal or guidance or things like that that end up kind of bumping out of the program space needed for the admin. So that's usually where the bump is there. Book room is not something that's typically broken out as one of their elements. So they've isolated that as an item that they'll allow but not participate in the eligible square footage associated with that. Same with the family resource room. It doesn't fit within their program in terms of the items that get spit out of the process. Other items that could be justified, like as the example was in the Marathon School, the health room was something that was justified under Marathon by this conversation. So there are accommodations if it's educationally based to support the direct delivery of education in the building versus support spaces that also help with educational delivery. I don't know if you color that any differently or not.
That's really helpful.
To make
Thanks.
things non-eligible.
Yeah. He said it, I didn't.
Well, I guess the second category of not eligible, but they'll allow it is better than
Yeah,
them
so,
saying we
over the
wouldn't,
years,
yeah.
they try and be uniform, and so,
Yeah.
Districts kept begging for years to get larger gyms, and they kept saying no, and eventually they got tired of saying no and said, fine, if you can justify it as part of your ed program based on the size of your school, we'll allow it. And so that kind of opened the door, and since then, other things have been accepted, such as the health room or other town-specific programs that can fit. The other thing that always straddles the fence are what we call breakout spaces or collaborative spaces. Bob's shown you a lot of them, and Don will, where the classrooms themselves kind of huddle around a pod. We kind of play the game there where they allow up to 1,000 square feet in a classroom. So if we come in at 950, we can borrow 50 to use that space, and the rest of it comes out of the grossing multiplier. And so there's a little bit of a cat and mouse there in terms of how much of that space we can get eligible. And when we get to the final schematic design in August, that kind of stuff will be dialed in at that point.
No, I appreciate it. It's helpful context because I know we often get questions from the community about some of the spaces, or why can't we make the gym bigger and just have the town pay for the rest of it. And so it's helpful to kind of understand that nuance between the different categories of what they'll allow and what they'll not reimburse for those conversations. Did you have a question?
I was just curious if we relabeled the room instead of a family resource room, if we called it, I don't know, like a PLC space where teachers were working on professional learning, if that was still considered like a support space versus a necessary space.
So, great question. So it depends on what the program elements are, and so they tie this kind of back to the ed plan. So if there's a need that can be justified in the ed plan for that space, and they like to use things, this gets more into the middle school projects, but you know, sorry, I'm looking for, but usage percentages. So in a middle school space, like they try and hover at least 75% has to be dedicated to a certain element, and then it can pick up other uses to that room, but the primary function of the room needs to have that primary function that ties back to the ed plan. That does play into the case of the office sometimes. You know, the office use could be defended depending on what it is ultimately, and we can work with the nomenclature with the office itself.
Any other questions? Okay. So the next is the recap of the January 24th public forum. It was certainly our best attended public forum in terms of in person, although that's not a high bar. But we had about 20 or so people there, which was great, and we had a lot of engagement around probably the most questions I think that we've had as well. The primary focus of a handful of the participants were the traffic impacts to Hayden Row. So at least my takeaway from that is if we do zero in on the Hayden Row site, we've got a lot of messaging work to do and a lot of data to provide around traffic so that the community can understand what the impacts will be and what the impacts won't be, what we're doing to mitigate those. But overall, I think that was the most of what I heard. I don't know if others have anything to add that they took from it.
No, I was going to echo those same sentiments. You know, a couple of direct neighbors attended there, obviously, you know, interested in the traffic and the impact on Hayden Row. Most specifically, there was a couple of questions related to cost. There was a couple of questions related to, can we make it larger and solve some of the broader issues in town? Can we make it a 4-grade school or more? You know, I answered that the MSBA invited us into the program with just 2-grade configurations, either a 2-grade or a 3-grade, and we can't step outside that program without jeopardizing the funding. So we have the path in front of us with the 2 or 3-grade options.
I will note also, following the forum, I did hear from a resident who attended who had a question about specifically about the design options that were pictured on Hayden Row, about understanding that the Elmwood site 234 is designed to be 3 floors because of the limited site space, but why are we doing the same at the Hayden Row site where we have ample space? I did email the folks at Vertex and Perkins Eastman, and Dan provided a really, really thorough answer that sort of amounts to there are a lot of efficiencies to the 3-floor building that make it a better choice in terms of heating and other climate control, in terms of people having to traverse the building and having to go long distances, and actually making it. There were the concern the resident raised also was about public safety, being able to cover a 3-story building, and Dan noted that the 3-story building actually makes it easier to provide 360-degree access. And I was also able to add in that we had a meeting with the chiefs last week where I asked that question, and they both did not hesitate to say the 3rd floor doesn't concern them at all. So, but other than that, we haven't gotten any emails from community members since the forum.
No, those are all great points, John. And just to echo that, the sustainability goals that have adapted and changed now, having the longer footprint means more roof insulation and more replacement costs down the road because you have a larger roof area and more foundations, longer roadways to get around that. So By making it a more compact building, it helps with your operational costs, your lifetime replacement costs, and the first cost of the building.
And I will share Dan's very thorough response with the whole committee so that all of you have that in case you get a similar question. It's got pictures and everything.
Hey, John, I have a quick question. if I
Sure.
could. Just to follow up to your comment, have they built a school similar to what they're proposing for us? Or is this a brand new design? Or is there something similar that they've already built somewhere else? Thank you.
Yeah. Easton, right?
That's 2 stories.
Two.
Is it
Oh,
a
you're
2-story
talking-
/ 3-story question? We
So
built
your-
3-story buildings, yes.
Your Newton one was a 3-story.
Newton-
Newton
3-story.
Service is a 3-story. Yep, and that's
Mount
K
Greylock's
through
3-story.
5. Mount Greylock's 3-story.
6
That's
through 8, or 6
5
through 12.
through.
6 through 12.
Yeah, sorry, I knew it had middle school in it. So those are both 3-story. I mean, there's others. Lowell is 5 stories.
5 stories.
So we have, a variety.
Well, and it's good to hear too that Newton one being a K through 5, it's an elementary school. It's a good use case against what we're talking about here.
Yeah, the classroom bar's 3 stories. The CAF and gym are just multi-volume.
Right.
So, yeah,
Which would be the same as we're doing. Yeah,
basically.
we're talking about here. Yep. Does that help, Bill? Oh,
Yes, yeah, I'm good, thanks.
okay. All right. You went off video. I thought that
Went to unmute.
answer offended you to the point where you left. I was okay.
Wrong button.
Any other comments or questions about the forum? Okay. All right. So I think we are moving on then to review and discuss design options.
Yeah, so the rest of the meeting agenda is kind of one topic, right? So we've presented the designs to you to date. You're going to see some various tweaks today that really are a response to your feedback and some questions just for clarity that we heard at the community forum, and Don can walk you through some of those modifications. And then we're going to talk about the evaluation criteria, which you've seen that list many meetings now at this point. Our recommendation was to kind of break that down into 2 chunks. Take one half of the list today that focuses more on site and traffic and circulation, to allow you to do a deeper dive on that, really, kick the tires on that. And then at your next meeting, we'll do the other half of the list, which has to do more with cost and schedule and the sustainability, which you heard about your last meeting, follow-up questions related to that, as well as swing space and impacts to construction, and kind of breaking those topics into 2 digestible increments. And then you come back together on the 13th to have any follow-up questions and final debate to make your recommendation to move forward. So the rest of the topics kind of all blend together, and I'll turn to Dawn to walk us through where we are in the updates.
Sure. So we just put together, and I think this was done ahead of the community meeting just for simplification because there's so many options at this point. But it's all consistent with the east and west. I want to make sure that got labeled correctly. So we talked about labeling them east and west based on, and that's on the Hayden row. And then the grades 2 and 3 are on the top row, grades 2, 3, and 4 on the bottom. The Ad Reno only has the 2, 3 as we mentioned before. So this is just a summary sheet for if we need to reference them and see all at once. So next is the Ad Reno.
Tom, sorry. So
Yep.
just for public benefit,
Yeah.
so we think we talked about this forum. So east is, for Hayden Row, is closer to
Correct.
Marathon. West is further away from Marathon.
No,
Or
I
other
think
way
it's the
around.
opposite.
All right,
West,
now
so
I'm
if
really
you're
glad
looking
I-
at page,
really glad I
page
qualified.
right is
Yep.
east.
Okay.
And that
Yeah.
on a map, right? So west means it's built closer to Hayden Row.
Closer to the Marathon School.
And closer.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then
And
east
east
is
is
farther
deeper
away,
into the site.
deeper into
Okay.
the site. Does that make sense? So if you're looking at the page, north, south, east, west, so east is to the right, just like on a map, right?
Okay.
And so the east would be deeper into the site. West would be closer to Marathon and Hayden Row.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. You're welcome. So that's what the E and W are. This is Ad Reno. Nothing has changed since we last presented it. Maybe it showed the additional dashed lines. A few of the Elmwood did not indicate those, and also did not indicate the connection to Wood Street. So now for consistency, all the Elmwood sites show expansion dash lines. They show connection to Wood Street. And how that connection is made, whether it's one way or bus only, car only, to be determined. We're just showing the connection for now as an outlet or an inlet.
And, another point to make that, the buildings themselves are kind of locked in terms of where they are. It certainly can shift a little bit, but the way we circulate traffic is something that can still be decided and tweaked along the way. So if there's an option you really like as we go through it, the parking, pick up and drop off, or the exact geometry of the bus loop, those things can kind of tweak. Obviously, this site is a lot more penned in because you're working with the existing infrastructure of the existing building.
And I would say across the board from a site standpoint, not even so much this one, but all of them, separation of car and bus for safety, dropping students on the correct side as best we can to the right, both getting out of a bus and also the back seat of a car. And this particular one has quite a bit of parking altogether, but any sort of ability to distribute. And then, of course, the amenity spaces that we previously talked about with the recess together and the PE spaces. So, recognition of those. We can, if there's a plan you like and some of the site amenities don't quite work, that can all be finessed. So that's this, and then the floor plan, and you can see we added the dashed lines on the floor plans as well, just for consistency, so you can see where the classroom bars would increase. And oh, you know what, in this case, I guess we would show it for a 2-3 and it would just be a 2-story, right? I was thinking the 3-4s, but they all have that ability. The MSBA asks for that. So this is the bar, both EE3 and EE4, which are the two different grade configurations, and the dashed lines and the connection out to Wood Street. We show the dashed parking that would or wouldn't appear depending on the grade configuration. Otherwise, nothing's changed on this one. I feel like a lot of the improvements I showed to you, was that 2 weeks ago, kind of held, and then we just made the adjustments based on comments. So here again, we show the possibility for expansion on the ends of the wings, but otherwise plan hasn't changed. This is Village, EE5 and 6 for the two grade configurations, the Wood Street connection, the expansion at the end of the 3 wings, and I don't think anything else has changed on that. And the floor plan still connects on all the floors and all of the same improvements I spoke to last meeting. And then we move to Hayden Row. This is 3E, 4E. So this is the east. So this is farther away from Marathon and Hayden Row, deeper into the site. And this shows the expansion lines. I think these always did. I actually don't think anything has changed on this one. And this is the west version, so closer to Marathon, which is just off the screen to the north. Hayden Row's on the left of the screen. Otherwise, nothing's changed. Show the expansion possibilities here on the floor plans for consistency. That one, just to back up, is probably one of our larger. We're trying to squeeze that sort of central piece to keep the square footage in check, but it's a little less efficient, just so everyone's aware.
So one question,
Sure.
I had this question before and I just felt silly asking it, but like with the cafeteria and the stage, you have that dotted line that is for smaller gym. So would the two rooms behind the cafeteria stage move closer then?
Yeah,
so
just
they
slide
would
it
move
up.
up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So the idea is that would get smaller and these adjacent spaces would be moved.
Thank you.
And that decision, I think, is imminent, right? So we'll know and the plan will adjust accordingly.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. It may not be perfect in the dashed line scenario, and as the decision is made and we adjust the plans if we need to, that's where we'll clean it all up and make it look intentional, not just...
I was just... Yeah. I was just looking
it's a
at
good
the
question.
two
Everybody
rooms.
at home has the same question,
Yeah,
so yeah,
totally.
feel free to ask any question that comes across. To just elaborate on Dawn's point, I've been chatting with Perkins just to make sure that the white space here fits within the grossing factor. It's 1.5 and it's slightly over now, and so that's where she's referring to tightening up some of those open spaces. We want an efficient building, and we also need to stay below that 1.5 multiplier so that we're in compliance with the program.
Hayden Row Village, and this is the east, so deeper into the site like we spoke about. I don't think anything on the site plan so much has changed since you last saw it. And then we have the west, closer to to Marathon and Hayden Row. It's kind of the flipped, again, the mirror image, I talked about that last time, so the entrance is it faces east. And then the floor plans, and those show the expansion dashes and also the Catherine gym that would potentially get smaller if it were the 2-3. And then that was it. I was gonna say last but not least, but that was last but not least. So really the plans for now are static until we have a decision, and then we will adjust accordingly. And, you know, if anything comes out of tonight, we'll make those adjustments ahead of next week's meeting, so.
All right, and we can come back to this. So just to segue to the evaluation criteria, to refresh everybody here and at home, there were 17 items that were developed from the building committee, the project team, and the community forum feedback to be used as a crib sheet to help evaluate the options that are in front of you. What we were suggesting is to break that into 2 meeting topics, and so the left side here has been grayed out, and we're focusing on the right side for tonight's meeting, which has to do with the site itself. So, the traffic that arrives at the site, how traffic and parking happen on the site, complexity related to permitting and approvals, making sure there's future growth and flexibility, understanding the district operations and impacts to busing. And I think I have to remove one of the S's because that was pointed out at the community forum that 2 S's was not appropriate, and we did not clean that up. And the public safety considerations, which I'll recap in a second. We did meet with them last week. Site complexities related to wetlands, ledge access, and easements, and we could talk a little bit about that. Walkability, bikeability, and then proximity to public utilities. And so at the next meeting, we'll focus on the left side, which has to do with more of the cost, schedule, and impacts of the project. Educational program, making sure that all the options fit that, and everything except the code should. But there could be some trade-offs: cost, schedule, disruption to education, including what's available to the school during the construction, just impact to neighbors, sustainability, net zero, and swing space. And we can certainly pull any of those things forward tonight if they're relevant, but we thought we'd kind of try and break it into 2 chunks for the committee to kind of work through. And then we'll go through and colorize this matrix. So just to back up a second, so the public safety, and John and Dan can echo if I forget anything, we met with police and fire last week, and I'll get you guys a set of minutes for your next meeting. We had a good conversation. They were comfortable with all the options. They certainly acknowledged that the ad reno option had a lot of, did not bring the same value that all the new options did. Some of the things they look at is obviously having a 360 ability to get around the building, not only for fire apparatus, but in case of intruder response protocols, they want to make sure they have good lines of sight. And so all the new buildings allow better use of that versus the ad reno of working what you have. The model from the 50s isn't really the model that we're building in 2020 right now. So the new construction options do respond to that. They had no issue with the 3-story building. They noted they were used to dealing with that in other parts of town with 3 stories. And overall, I think it was a productive meeting, and they're happy with the options that have been laid out in front of us. Once we pick an option, they're excited about the opportunity to really dig into the floor plan in terms of how the floor plan gets laid out and what their concerns may be with any school, and having an ideal layout with that school once we get to that point. But overall, I thought the starting point for the floor plans were good as well. I don't know if there's anything
They
sums it up.
Yeah, they also, I would say, asked a lot about the traffic flow on campus in any of them, just kind of trying to understand, which obviously we're not there yet, but about what would be the one-way options, how would we bring in the different parts, buses versus cars, if the new access and egress at some of the sites would be left turn or right turn only, those kinds of questions that they had that Dan and Jeff and others explained was work we still have to do. So they're looking forward to collaborating with us on that too, and figuring out what are those best options to manage the traffic.
Yep, no, excellent point. That the fact that all options have 2 means of egress was a huge plus for them, and they understand that we'll work through the ebbs and flows, and that'll come as part of the traffic report itself in terms of recommendations and which flows clockwork or counterclockwork and how you work around the parking lot. So there's a lot of possibilities with both sites in terms of the space. Ad reno being the least favorable again because you're closest to kind of that roadway there and a shorter runway for loading cars.
But on the Elmwood side, they did like to see that all of them had that Wood Street
Yes, absolutely.
access and egress being.
Yeah, with the new options, they were, yeah, very
they like that. Yep.
Any questions on process before we get into the matrix? Okay. So I sent you guys a blank template over the weekend, just to take it for your own notes. And the consultant team has sat down last week and did a first pass at, what a colorized matrix might look like, and tried to weight them. Now, a reminder that we're looking at the relative weight of these things against each other. And so what that looks like here on the screen here is we've grayed out the items that we're going to talk about at next week's meeting and focused on the items that we're discussing tonight. This is a draft for discussion and feedback amongst the committee. I'll work from the bottom up because those are the easier ones to discuss, and obviously we'll get to kind of traffic towards the end, which is obviously the important topic here. So working from the bottom up, access to public utilities, this criteria was more relevant when we had multiple sites in town beyond these two. So when we were looking at the East Main location that was privately owned, that did not have the same access to utilities that we did over here. So these options all gray out similarly. The Elmwood itself, has the easement of the gas main running through it, but the original utilities do cross over the gas line. So we believe we can cross over it with the current utilities that we propose for the new building. There may be some, additional requirements related to that, but overall it's still achievable. Hayden Row, we grade out the west higher because it's a shorter run to the roadway. The east was deeper into the site, and so you would have to run more utilities at a higher cost and a longer duration. So that's the difference in Hayden Row of east versus west. Having the east location being deeper, there is more cost and more time associated with bringing those utilities in deeper to the site overall. But otherwise, all of them graded out well. All at least a medium green, if not a dark green. Walkability and bikeability, I should say it's hard to read for anybody here at home, but on the right side of the column we put a couple of notes in the comments section. Walkability and bikeability, we essentially determined we're neutral with these two sites. Again, this criteria was more relevant. We had more options and more sites on the table. Just to recap, both of these sites are on main thoroughfares. Both of them have a sidewalk on one side of the street. And so, they had similar characteristics in that regard, that you do have to deal with traffic. Students can't arrive from both sides of the site. In both cases, at least two sides of the site back up to wooded areas, so you're really only approaching from one or two sides. So if anyone grade out slightly higher, I guess it would be Elmwood, because you have technically two means of access, but again, it's not really a lot of neighborhoods packed around either site. So the walkability and bikeability was essentially neutral. We felt that both. And again, as we go through this, if the committee feels any different, so we want to revisit these, we can recolorize these this evening as well.
Do we have data on walkers and bikers to Marathon and Elmwood at the moment?
Oh, the principals would have that information. Who walks?
It's extremely, at Elmwood, the number is very low.
Yes.
No more than 4 or 5.
Yeah, I was
on
thinking.
any day, and that would probably be a lot.
Okay. I was thinking that.
There are way more at Hopkins.
Yeah.
What about Marathon?
No, not really, I don't think.
Okay.
We should check with Mrs. DeBoe though.
But for sure
They're tiny
there's-
though.
They're tiny. Yeah, I guess. Or I guess I'm trying to figure out like what is the, because I had a feeling that was going to be the answer about Elmwood. Just given its site location, it seems like it would be really difficult.
Do you have a policy related to who you allow to release students to? In some towns, they allow, in a typical K-5, K to 2 can only be released to the parents, where 3, 4, 5 are able to dismiss themselves. You guys have a
We only release to an adult.
Okay.
And there's a little neighborhood around the corner that some folks, if that's where they live, they may walk over. I think it's called Apple something. But anyway, and we had in the 10 years that I've been there, we've had one family that wanted a bike rack because they wanted to bike over. But
does the Hopkins, they self-release, or do they release to parents as well?
No, I think that they self-release there, yeah. When the walkers go, they just go.
And there are quite a few more walkers there.
Quite a few.
Yeah.
And bikers.
And bikers.
Like when I go through this in my mental model, like the Elmwood School is off of Elm Street, but it's also off of Wood Street. And Wood Street, like, nobody walks Wood Street. It's super busy. There's no crosswalks anywhere.
And there's no
Right.
adult staff that
Right.
supports crossing the street. We don't have crossing guards or.
Right. Whereas the other schools, while they're off of Hayden Row, the other Hayden Row that comes in has tons of houses on it. It's very walkable. There's a lot of kids that live in those areas, and there's also a lot of little niche neighborhoods all around the area that kids can walk into. So it absolutely, I mean, just instinctually feels a lot more walkable than the Elmwood School property.
It's definitely more walkable.
And the age of the kids too. Right?
They're a little bit older too, yeah.
I think that the Elmwood property, I mean, I know we have it as yellow, it's kind of neutral. I do wonder about having it be less advantageous and being orange because the trucks that come around that corner from Wood and Elm, there's also no, it's almost like a blind spot. Like
Coming
if there
out,
was
it is,
someone,
yes.
I mean, you can't walk there, truly. It would be dangerous. And the actual utility poles are in the sidewalks over by Elmwood, so you have to like step into the road or around depending on the time of the year. Like if there's snowbanks, you actually step into the road to get around the utility pole and back up. And like families who have a carriage or a student who has some type of disability and maybe needs a wheelchair, like that would be a very challenging place to walk, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, I think that the sort of the impression of the site coupled with the current state data sort of I think tells us that that I'm not sure that one's neutral either.
Yeah, I'm wondering if, I guess what I was trying to say is I'm wondering if the feeder roads and the crosswalks on the feeder roads should be taken into account in terms of walkability.
I think they should. I mean, we were looking at it from purely where the sidewalks connect standpoint, but this is why this is a conversation, right? You have the intricate knowledge of the town and the operations and how it works, and you know where the neighborhoods are that are densely populated and more likely to have their kids walk. And I think the fact that you have multiple crossing guards, at Hayden Row, speaks to the fact that it likely is a better gradation compared to the Elmwood. And you guys can decide whether you want to downgrade Elmwood or upgrade Hayden Row, to be a light green versus Elmwood downgrading to an orange. That's
Or
it.
both.
Or both, whatever. Yeah, this is all part of the discussion,
Yeah.
and you may choose that. If you did move the school to Hayden Row, you may allow the third graders or fourth graders to self-release, depending on which solution is picked. So, having more ability to trust the network of sidewalks that connect could change policy and how you guys approach it.
And I do think I apologize. I think I didn't really realize it didn't click at first, but the Hopkins data, if we do go to a 2-3-4, is pretty relevant too, because there have been a ton of kids who have walked to Hopkins forever.
Oh yeah.
And
It's
so,
crazy.
and that's because of all those neighborhoods that are right there.
Right, exactly.
And all of those, if we do go a 2-3-4, I would think a lot of those fourth graders would still walk because it's probably the same distance, just in a slightly different direction. The kids coming from Charlesview, the kids, it's all really walkable from there.
And there's a crossing guard.
The crossing guard,
and,
yep.
So it makes it easy, yeah.
And even without the crossing guard, I guess the crosswalks was my thought. Like Wood
Yeah.
Street has no crosswalks,
Right.
right? Like unless you get all the way up to Woodville, it
Well,
really
yeah.
doesn't have any crosswalks.
Yeah,
whereas,
there's one.
And the
Whereas-
sidewalk is on the other side.
yeah,
So you'd have
When there is a sidewalk.
When there is,
When
yeah.
there is one.
Whereas in
Yeah.
Hayden Row, there's tons of crosswalks
Yeah.
and lots of like stop sign areas that have
So
Lights even, there's a light too, yeah.
Can we make it orange? What do we have to do to?
Just tell me. Yeah, that's
Is it an Excel
by general
spreadsheet? We can
consensus,
just,
are we
like-
going orange for? Well, let's one at a time. Do we want to
Here'd be
make
orange
Elmwood
for-
orange?
I think Elmwood should be orange for walkability and bikeability.
Any-
I agree too.
I agree.
Agree.
Okay. All right.
done.
And what about Hayden Row? Do we want to make that? Do we want to leave that neutral, or do we want to make it light green?
I think the challenge is we're talking about third grade students too. And I mean, I think I would that's going to be maybe the sticking point, is that for third graders walking up and down Hayden Row by themselves, that might not be so good. But a fourth grader, no problem. And a fifth grader, I'd be like, good luck, buddy, see you in a few hours. Like, I think that's the tricky part, is that, right? So, I mean, in my head, it's really not yellow, but maybe because of the age range that we're talking about potentially at this new school. Either way, we're still having third graders at this new school, right? So, and second graders.
Yeah.
And second graders who may, I don't know, that, it's probably a conversation for another time, but I don't know if I'd change it just because they're little. It's green in my head, but
I also wonder about, depending on if it's east or west, the length of how much walking changes it too. So
Yeah, I think yellow is good too because, Hayden Row has a lot of work traffic.
Yes.
So even though we have the crosswalks and everything's good, there's always this chance that you have like work traffic going through that isn't paying attention or things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think yellow works.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, if you think about it, like when we talk about Hayden Row as its walkability, we're almost comparing it to other roads and locations in town. We're not great as a town in terms of overall sidewalks, crosswalks, crossing guard, all of those things. So good for us might probably still rate yellow, I think.
let's keep it yellow.
I agree because Hayden Row already has more traffic, and with the addition of this new school, there will be even more traffic. So just from that perspective, I think yellow makes sense.
Okay. Great, great dialogue. And I'll say that, for simplicity's sake, I focused on the kind of the larger school for this first round of exercise. Once the school committee makes their decision at the next meeting, we can revisit anything we talk about tonight if we think there are nuanced differences between the 2-3 and the 2-4 options. And so, big picture tonight, we want to think about the bigger site, the bigger building, and then we can dial it in based on the decisions that the school committee makes at the grade configuration meeting. So, the next one had to do with site complexities, and so wetlands, ledge. We had noted access, but I also added restrictions on this one, kind of developing a little tweak from where we were early on in the evaluation criteria. And that had to do with the gas line. The gas line itself, Mike and I and Dan have been looking to do research to try and pull more information. We've got the original deeds, that shows the gas line. I tried to track down some people about, what can we do close to the gas line in terms of drilling for geothermal. I haven't got an answer yet on that, so we're still looking. We know we can certainly build up to the site. We know we can cross over it with utilities, but I don't know at what point you can get too close with the subsurface borings that you'd be doing for the geothermal well. So that's still an open item that we need to discuss and get some more feedback to you guys on. But as far as ledge and restrictions, they both have wetlands. So as of this week, we've started the wetlands flagging that you guys approved at your last meeting for the Hayden Row site, so we're going to have more information on that. Both do have wetlands. There's a lot of wetlands in the back of Elmwood, and so those are a little more neutral to each other. But there's certainly more ledge at Elmwood. Anybody that's driven by Elmwood and looked at the boulders that just get kind of casually pushed out of the parking lot or in the back of the site, that when they built that building, they found a lot of rock. And so, that will come with premiums, that will come with, blasting and the things that come along with blasting. So you could certainly blast. We do it in lots of projects. It's a controlled environment. Dan and I and Don can answer more questions on that, but if you choose Elmwood, there would be some level of blasting. It is a controlled, scheduled environment regulated by the fire department and state codes. But obviously blasting next to an existing building is certainly a very concerning thing versus some of the new builds on Elmwood that wouldn't be near that. And as of now, we don't envision ledge over at Hayden Row. When we first built the Marathon School, we'd hit some rocks in the borings and we thought we might find some ledge, and then when we actually built the building, we did not. We found plenty of big rocks, but not large outcroppings of ledge. It was stuff that we were able to crush up and process on site and reuse, so that had some advantageous aspects of the project as well.
So for the people at home, what's the difference between finding ledge and finding big rocks?
Excellent question. So big rocks, depending on the size of the big rocks, and we've found some Volkswagens before, so They could be large. You can break it up with a hoe ram, which would basically just be a mechanical hammer on the end of an excavator, kind of crushing it up. We can also drill and separate it depending on the size of it is, if it is one of those larger, rocks that can't be moved in its own right. Ledge requires drilling and blasting, so in a controlled environment you would drill little boreholes, pour a little depth charge in there, you put rubber mats, which are essentially old recycled tires, multiple layers on top, and you have a little burp essentially as it goes off. We're doing it just down the street at the Ashland Elementary School there that we're building. The Mendez Elementary School, we removed a lot of ledge there right next to an existing building, in some cases within 20 feet of it, and it was not an issue. We would tell the kids like it's coming, and they'd be like, "That's it." And off, and you expect it to be this big thunderous like pop, but it's really just like this kind of little verp. And if you hit a vein that the school was on, sometimes they could feel the reverberation, but if it was not close to the building and you didn't happen to hit the vein the school was kind of sharing the ledge of, then they didn't even notice when we were doing it. So, and we'd certainly, if we go with Elmwood, we'd reach out to those local counterparts, and you can chat with those principals and building committees about what their experience with it is. If you do have ledge, the state mandates a 200 foot radius where you have to notify all the abutters and provide them with an existing conditions survey. So on our dime, the project would pay to have their houses video surveyed to lock in the existing conditions of the building should a damage claim be brought against the project. Both sides are protected. They can choose to not accept that. In the past, the ones that haven't accepted it are also the ones that have made the claim, coincidentally. But that does happen, and generally those are the ones that make the claim. But you could expand that beyond that and do 400 feet or 500 feet. Or get to the closest neighbor if there was nothing around that 250 foot radius. So we've done all different types, and we'll talk about that with you should we go forward with an Elmwood and should we find ledge in the borings that we do at that Elmwood site. Any questions on ledge or wetlands or site? Or Dan, and you've spent a lot of time thinking about site. Anything complexity-wise I've missed? Or
no? I think another indication of ledge is the current Elmwood building in the various elevations to that.
Yes.
The way they built it.
There's a reason they did that.
Yeah. So the assumption is there's probably a lot of ledge under the current building.
Yeah, it's a great point, Tim. Well, the end of the building, which was a more modern addition, really cranks up, which puts your ADA challenges that we have to resolve. But it was obviously done to save money and not blast directly adjacent to an original building.
Slash gas line.
Slash gas line. Which is actually another good point.
It's funny you said.
I was like, blasting your gas lines.
But I was going to say, I appreciate the consideration of the gas line, but I also really both appreciate and want to point out, because again, I think this is a conversation that has gotten muddled in town, that the gas line was specifically placed under site complexities, not under public safety.
Yes.
The issues the gas line primarily presents us is it makes the site harder to work with because we can't build on top of it. And so it makes that makes the site more complex, but gives me another opportunity to reiterate to people that they should not be concerned that there is a gas line that bisects the school. It bisects basically the entire town, and does not cause public safety any major worries.
That's a good point. So that may put very specific restrictions on the ability to blast within whatever they determine is the acceptable radius that can't be done within, which may change the overall elevation of your building. You could still build on the site, but you may have to build it up as opposed to building it down, which then can have a ripple effect in terms of where you tie into the public roadways or how the accessibility happens on the site outside the building. So we've certainly raised buildings up to save money or to work with existing conditions, and that may be a case where at Elmwood, if there are restrictions related to subsurface ledge removal, we may have to change the starting point of the building floor plan. So for all those reasons, we felt that this one did have a good size significant difference between the two sites, and so Elmwood was graded out as an orange, although the glass line ledge removal question bears some more looking into. The Hayden Row I put as light green versus dark green because there are wetlands. We still don't know exactly where they are. there is a lot of rock and things like that we have to work around, but it's a very usable site, but there are challenges related to it. So that's why it's light green versus a dark green.
Will we have any of that wetlands data back before we vote on the 13th?
Might. They got halfway through today and they found the weather to be the area to be challenging because of just the weather and what's the coverage is now. So she was going to try to get back there either early next week or later in the week, but I think we're going to get a pretty deep freeze over the weekend, so I don't know what that means as far as flagging. But I know she got around the portion facing the marathon, which is not as important to us as the part that she didn't get to.
We also one snowstorm can blow it out of the water too, so that's the other thing that, no pun intended.
It's going to be 40 for the
Right.
next 10
Yeah,
days, except for Saturday.
It's gonna be good next week, so.
So for now, we're going by like what the GIS maps, say, which the benefit is that there's enough real estate at Hayden Row that one of those 4 options can certainly work, regardless of where we kind of find the wetlands in that zone where the other challenges are more locked in.
For site complexities, I'm wondering, should the existing building only, should that be a neutral? Because I would not think the ledge should affect if you're staying with the existing building only. Or should be less of an impact?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm just trying to differentiate in my mind between, for the current Elmwood site, should there be a difference in color coding between the existing building versus Ed Reno versus a new building?
No, I think that's a great point, Drew. I think, from a code upgrade only, we need to, in the code upgrade only, we took the process that we have to solve at least a backup of parking queue onto the street, so we would have to work with the surface issues there related to that. But you're right, if we're only doing the code, we would not be adding any square footage or changing some of the other makeup of the building. And so, yeah, that one could be a neutral, I think, as it relates to the code one.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I think with the Ad Reno, you'd still be doing subsurface things, so that should be consistent with the 2 new options. Any other further comments or discussion? We'll go to the next one. All right, so public safety, I gave a little bit of hint to this, my recap of that meeting. They were very happy that in all the new options, they had full vehicular accessibility around the site. They were, fire specifically was fine with responding to the 3-story building. They noted that from a intruder response standpoint or optimal lines of sight, the Ad Reno and the code were less advantageous, and that they also recognized that the 2 new options at Elmwood themselves were not necessarily in a perfect ideal because you are working around the existing building and the existing gas line. And so, although both good, it didn't grade out as well as the Hayden Row, which is essentially a blank canvas for respond to their types of wish list items. So that's why we graded those ones out the way they exist here on this. And I will get you the minutes from that meeting, and if we want to revisit that at a subsequent meeting or make any modifications based on that, we can as well. District operations and busing with 1 S. Was there are trade-offs associated with district operations and busing, and so I think, from an operations standpoint, some of the notes I noted that consolidating the schools, maintenance, staff, and facilities, and ability to have the administration all centrally located had some positives related to the operations for the district itself versus maintaining, Elmwood where it is today. The busing itself has challenges of crossing traffic with the 2 main thoroughfares of Hayden Row, and then you have Wood to Elm Street, and you have buses that are coming up and converging through Pleasant Street to get back up onto the Hayden Row corridor, and where if you had the campus become a lower campus at Hayden Row, you essentially could split the busing so that the lower campus busing, which would be the Marathon and Elmwood, would stay on one side of Hayden Row and intermingle between the off-campus aspect of it without having to get back onto Hayden Row and then turn over to the upper campus. So essentially with a 2-4 scenario, if the 5th grade, and if the Hopkins became a lower middle school, it grades out better for busing because the buses really stay on their respective campuses. This is one item where if it was a 2-3 or a 2-4, there's probably some amount of difference that could be drilled down between the two options. I don't know if I'm missing anything else there. I'll have to look to the schools. Any other comments or feedback related to busing or operations or things that I glazed over?
I would put the operations at Hayden Row at a most advantageous as opposed to just advantageous.
And then with Elmwood, do you think that grades out as a less advantageous or a neutral? You know, some of the, as you think about that, some of the other comments that I put in the notes but didn't mention here was that there may be longer bus routes associated with I think that particular option. You know, one of the economies of Hayden Row is there could be a re-look at the way busing happens, and right now there's a duplication of busing in the neighborhoods because you go and pick up for Elmwood and then another bus comes by and picks up a similar age group to then go to Hayden Row. And by consolidating, you know, you can consolidate the number of buses related to the lower elementary school campuses.
So chances are if we do 2, 3, 4 and stay at the Elmwood site, we would probably go back to Elmwood and Marathon being on the same bus, which is what we did previously. So that means that they'll pick up half at Marathon, half at Elmwood, cross town, and pick up at the other school. Right now, because of proximity, we've put Marathon and Hopkins together and gave Elmwood its own. But if Hopkins becomes a 5, 6, we would probably consolidate that with middle school, high school. And if Elmwood stays at the Elmwood site, we would probably go back to sharing those buses where now you're truly crossing town. So you wouldn't be doubling in the neighborhood, but you've already added that time of crossing town to pick up the other school. Whereas on Hayden Row, your proximity, of course, now from Marathon to Elmwood is very close. You get both schools and off you go.
I think as a parent, it's not so much pick up from the schools that would affect me. It would be drop off, right? Because if you have to go to Elmwood and then Marathon, that adds time, which means my child has to get to that bus stop a lot earlier than I would prefer in the mornings in order to be able to get on that bus to get to the school that they need to get to.
Would the Marathon or would the Hayden Row location reduce the number of buses we run?
There is a potential, but either way, what you're going to do is you're going to capture your Marathon and Elmwood students together.
Right.
There's potential that you could reduce if they're on Hayden Road just due to the fact that you now don't have that 15 minutes of crosstown that is added on. So you're looking both at capacity and time for students to be on a bus. So right away that cross-town adds all that time that we'll have to be very mindful to try to bring down. So you may have to increase your bus fleet because of the time, as opposed to Hayden Row, where you may be able to decrease your bus fleet because you're not adding that additional time. Okay. So long way of saying, yes, on Hayden Row, there is a potential to reduce the fleet.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can certainly reduce the runs, which is so exciting, I think, for kids.
Right.
They're on those buses a long time now.
The only reason the code right now is red here, because again, you're working with the existing condition situation and that not having enough, queue space on the site, and so that's why that one is red versus the other ones being orange at Elmwood.
The other piece in terms of operations, when you're thinking of your facility maintenance, again, proximity, if they're both on Hayden Row, you could be servicing Elmwood and Marathon in close proximity with all equipment. And otherwise, you're crossing town again to get to the other school for service, for maintenance, equipment that may be shared.
So do we want to keep the coloring the way it is? You mentioned, Susan, Hayden Row being more advantageous versus advantageous. We've definitely talked about a lot of the moving parts here. Do we want to leave the coloring as is, or do we want to make an adjustment as a group?
I think she knows more about busing than any of us, so she says dark green, I'm all for dark green.
Probably more than anyone on the planet. You know more about busing. But it does make intuitive sense that it's just going to be, everything's closer together. Parents, of course, this is a generalization, but if you have a kid at Marathon, you might have an older kid at, the new school too, and vice versa. That age range is kind of together, and then they sort of cycle up together. So it makes sense, even from a drop-off pickup perspective. I feel like there's less people going back and forth across town, which will hopefully also help the traffic situation in addition to the operations situation. So make it green. Make it real green.
So we've heard about busing. Tim, what does the maintenance look like when you have Elmwood separated in the other campus?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of moving equipment around town, as Susan suggested. We have tractors and Kubotas and all that type of thing that we're trailering to get down to Elmwood. So it's just makes it a little more difficult to get there, fighting that traffic, having that equipment on the street when we wouldn't necessarily need to if it was on the same campus. I think the efficiencies in plowing and stuff like that is, we pick up a great deal just because they're, right next to each other. You'd be plowing this section and that section, not driving across town to do it. So I think there's a lot of kind of efficiencies that way. Same thing with lawn maintenance and all that stuff. So I think those, would be a great opportunity, I think, for the maintenance department to have two main campuses rather than 1, 2, kind of 3 campuses that we're working with now.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm guessing there would be a snow storage efficiency at the combined that large.
Yeah, that's
site
something we would
versus
work
the
with
Elmwood,
the
which is a much
DPW
smaller.
on. Yeah, so DPW right now comes through the schools after a snowstorm, and they pick up a lot of snow, so we might be able to pick up some efficiencies even through the DPW with that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think I'm hearing a strong feeling that it should be darker green than the current coloring. Okay. So next topic has to do with the school future growth and flexibility. We talked a little bit about some earlier questions. There's inherent flexibility in the number of pupils per classroom, right? But this is really focused more on the flexibility of the physical built condition. Both from where can an addition happen on the building itself, what has more capacity for parking, associated needs for fields, and most importantly, longer queue capacity on site. And so being the fact that Hayden Row has more of a blank canvas and less hamperings, that one graded out as the most advantageous. The Elmwood itself with the 2 new options, as Don showed you on the slides, those had room for additions, and we certainly can add those additions in, and there's capacity. It still is tight with some of the circulation around the site itself, and that's why that one fed out as a neutral as opposed to the dark green. We also are still dealing with the gas line under both those scenarios, and option EE4, which is the third column here, that bar is fronting right along the gas line, so it looks like you could easily move this way, but you can't. So you can only build to the back of the site. The village itself, again, you're up against the back of the site, so you can only build into the front of the site. So you're essentially building an addition in a not optimal location, really, at your front door. So they're neutral because you can accommodate it at both, but they're not ideal, and so that's why we suggested those ones were yellow. The ad reno was orange in this case because we're building onto the existing footprint that's already not ideal. We do have the ability to add additions, which are now again pushing back in further into the site where we know there's that existing ledge. You still have the same challenges with site circulations and gas. So we just felt that that was a peg lower than the 2 new builds at the Elmwood site, and that the code reno just, I mean, doesn't meet your capacity. So that's why that's just red in general.
One question, in the Elmwood site, if we were to build out the extra parts, would the parking still cover, or would we be low on parking? So if we were to build the additions, because I was thinking like in the other site you can grow the parking, right? So you build the additions, and if you need to grow the parking, you have room to grow the parking.
I should say we could pull up a slide too at any point. You guys want to, instead of just listen to me talk, I can bring up graphics to help make points. So this is the ad reno. So I think this scenario actually shows the larger parking lot. So I think under this scenario we actually wouldn't need this front one, because if you look at the comparable size parking, that was really the 2-3 up front, and that was the 2-4 was that extra. So I think what this ad rental option shows is actually the increased parking that would really be associated with the 2-4 when you scale it off in comparison to the other 2 versions. So I think you can make the parent pickup drop off work well here, and the parking does. I think push comes to shove, the bus loop could certainly drift more into the center of the site and build in some capacity for the parking as well. And again, the ad rental is the 2-3.
I wasn't talking about the ad reno. I was asking if I go to the 234. So if you go to the 234, right, you have the area to extend, right?
Yep.
So if we were to extend for any reason this building, the parking, if it was a 234, would no longer be enough, right?
Do you know how many, I guess it would depend on, it's one staff, I'm thinking number of parking per, because it's quite a bit more students, but it's not necessarily more staff. Like, it's a handful of staff, meaning if you add 6 classrooms, it's 6 teachers, maybe there's a 6 plus, you know, the FTE might be 7 or something. So, I don't know.
I mean, you might end up having to add some parking off the loop road that's there.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think you would add some parking for the loop road, you know, along this area somewhere for the teachers at a minimum, right? And then you always gauge the number of visitors you get. And then codes that may change at that point. We're probably going to have a lot more electrical vehicle charging stations in our lifetime. But
you'd be taking away from PE zones. So I guess my point is, if we needed to extend the building, a lot of other things would not be able to be extended without cutting into things that we built for the kids.
Yeah, I think under this scenario here, you know, what you see at this scale is that you may end up with an awkward jog even in the road right now, because it kind of smoothly comes across, because this is your terminus point at Elmwood. You'd end up with this little kind of hook shot around the end of the building, and then over here you could still squeeze a road, but it would feel more like an urban edge, where you're really kind of coming and turning hard with, you know, Wood Street on your right and then the building on your left, and so it would be a narrower passage there. So yes, less advantageous as you look at it. And then just to continue with that thought, so the other one here has a better gradation of it, because, you know, again, you would probably build that parking in the PE zones, because up here you're up against the wetlands. That's this white line here, and that white line would need to be confirmed in this option. And we showed the build zones, but it looks like the way they've laid out the current roadway, we'd stay out of that zone, and we just need to confirm where that, you know, edge of wetlands truly is in this option. And again, some of the stuff in the front could be interchanged, the rain gardens and the pickup and drop off, but, you know, besides the little additions to the wing, you know, you may end up building, you know, off the main entrance in some sort of a fashion.
Okay. Thank you. I was just trying to decide if neutral or orange, so that's why I was asking.
So yeah, so we had left the new builds as neutral because it can be accommodated within the site, but it's not necessarily as optimal as the other options. Right, so permitting approvals and complexity.
Hey, Jeff, can I ask one quick question?
Sure.
None of the slides come up on a Zoom connection, but I'm watching on HCAM Live. It's about an 8-second delay. But could you pull up HR6E? And I'm wondering, if there's a case to be made that that is the most advantageous of all sites for future growth, because the way the building is set, they all have that 10% buffer where you can add on. But if I'm correct, HR 6 East is unlimited on how much you could bump those wings out. So wouldn't that make it the most advantageous of all the sites?
No, great points, Bill. I think certainly what we know now about the site and that part of the site, we're still, investigating that, has the most real estate, to your point, to have the most ability to expand. So I do think that has more than some of the other ones.
Well, I would say even compared to Village West, because it's facing towards Hayden Row, and you can't go any further that way. That's just kind of stuck out to me, that East had the most of anything we're looking at as far as future growth. So I don't know, I know there's not a green plus, but really, really green.
We can make it the other way. We can make them a green minus too. I mean, these are excellent points, Bill. And I think one of the reasons we really want to know where the wetlands is here, that we're looking at now, is the building itself may shift more forward and may or may not provide more space in the back. And some of the pieces in the front, as Don noted, we can juggle around, like parking, the basketball courts, recess, and the PE field zones can still shape and shift, right? The building itself is the most important item to lock in, and then some of those other pieces could be trimmed around it in the end state.
Yeah, actually, now that you're showing it, I was wrong. The west doesn't bump up against the Hayden Road. It bumps up against the loop, though, which once the loop is in, then you can't really, it would be expensive to take the loop out and push those wings out more if you needed it. But anyway, I appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think when you guys get to the option that you ultimately select, we'll work with Perkins' team to locate it in a flexible space that allows for that. Make sure we've accommodated the future expansion and maintaining those roadways around. So. All right, so are we leaving the Hayden Rows graded out the same for now, the darker green? Yeah, actually not. All right. So permitting and complexity. So both projects will have to go in front of the Conservation Commission. Both projects will have to go in front of the Planning Board. The gas line has more complexities related to Elmwood, which is one of the differentiators on that site, because it can limit development of that particular site in a way that we still have to chase to ground. Open space, there's a lot more ability to meet the open space requirements at Hayden Row than Elmwood in terms of the site itself. One of the challenges on even Marathon was they wanted more islands and green space within the parking lots. We have a little more ability to have a more spaced out parking with this particular site versus the Elmwood site, which is more tighter, packed in together. The ledge wouldn't really play into the permitting complexities, other than the fact that you also have the fire department sign off related to that and their interaction. So that would be the only item I think I would add with the ledge removal from a permitting complexity standpoint. Are there any other permits, Dan, you're thinking I didn't pick up?
For all of them?
Yeah, for all of them.
Yeah, the code repair probably needs some variances from the AAB.
For sure.
Yeah, well, we kind of... Yeah.
So that's why we kind of gave that a little bit more red, because there's probably more, existing building requirements that need to be jumped through more hoops there.
Thanks. Yeah, good point. That's why the ad reno is orange. I forget why we differentiated the village. Remember why we differentiated the village from the bar?
One of them was closer to the gas line.
Yeah, but I think it was maybe the wetlands, maybe the village was closer to the wetlands. Yeah, because I think in the, let's just go back to that, make sure we trace our steps. So I think it was the wetlands related to that, right? Because the village itself, we don't know where the wetlands buffer line is. This is from the town GIS, and this one could encroach, especially with the future addition, into that setback, and so that's the part of why we differentiate this from the other one. The bar, is well out of all those zones, but certainly, there are restrictions related to the gas line and challenges related to that. But that wetlands was one of the reasons we had the slight variation of orange to yellow in the Elmwood options. All right, so parking and on-site circulation. So Hayden Row, all graded out with enough real estate to have both on-site queue that would prevent the backup from hitting the main road of Hayden Row and getting far enough away from Marathon with the on-site roads. So that graded out as advantageous. The new construction and the ad renos can handle the capacity of pulling the traffic off of Elm Street and Wood Street. So that's a good reason for that project itself and that option. We rated that as neutral. As I noted in some of these options, there are variations even from the from the plan here where we would still need to look at where the queue picks up and actually stops. Unlike Hayden Row where you really enter at the front and you come in deep, it makes a much easier clockwork and a more natural flow. Here we really need to think about exactly where the pickup itself would occur. As an example, if we picked up here, we could have the queue come and enter in Wood Street, or we could have it start at Elm and go all the way around the building there. But in this case, the busing is not as long as it would ideally be, so we may end up pushing the busing, over to this rain garden here. It's just an example of where you kind of finesse these ones. So I think there's a solution that works with both of the options at Elmwood, but it's less advantageous than the Hayden Row as it relates to the on-site circulation in terms of where you would start and stop that pickup and queue. I think you can handle the capacity, but when you look at bus and traffic, there's a balance there between the two needs that you're trying to work through. And so for those reasons, we initially put the ad reno and the new construction as neutral, and then obviously code was still red. And then the new options at Hayden Row, because of how deep they are on the site, allows for the best circulation and on-site parking capacity. Okay. So,
yeah, it seems straightforward.
Okay. So the last topic that we were planning to tackle tonight, and can certainly revisit any of these, and certainly dig into next week's stuff too if there are questions related, was traffic. I'm gonna have Dan give you a little update on kind of where we are in the overall traffic process at this point.
So Vinod was out there this morning and this afternoon, and Susan was nice enough to send us all the pickup plans for the Hopkins and the middle school and high school, so we can start to think about how this might all affect it if you went with a 2-3-4. He did send me an email about it because I asked him what he thought, and he basically said that the congestion period for the high school, middle school could increase by a few more minutes when compared to the current conditions when grade 5 start and end times are changed. But it would not dramatically alter the traffic operations in the area. And he feels that the more comprehensive traffic solution for the corridor that addresses vehicle speeds and off-peak capacity enhancements, adding turn lanes and such, and other options to calm traffic, those recommendations are the outcome of the more detailed traffic study. So I think he's, in a nutshell, saying, I think we can still do it. I think it's still doable. It's not. It might increase it a little bit, but it's not fatal in his mind. So I think he's going to get back to me with more. But that was his initial. I wanted to try to get an initial kind of feel for it, so that at least I could give you something what he saw today.
So this is, additional insight, beyond kind of where we plan to bring the traffic study. We're focused on the Elmwood project, but a lot of the feedback in the community is about, the greater network and how does that look. And the design team is doing a more in-depth traffic study. And I think we're probably going to want to scope that up more so that we have more answers, you know, at town meeting with the ultimate solution that's out there. And so that was his attempt to look at some of those other topics that came up and what are the impacts to Hopkins, because that was a question that came up through the forum.
Yeah, he went over to Pleasant Street too and looked at that as well. That was a question that came up. I sent him over there and he kind of gave me an email shrug. Like, I don't know exactly what to say right now about that. He's like, they're going to keep doing it anyway because it's a cutoff to get to around that light. He's like, I don't know what.
Yeah, that's going to keep happening.
He was like, I don't know if I can traffic my way out of that one.
Yeah. One question I have is, when we're looking at these designs, part of what we're considering is how the Marathon Elmwood tie, if it was on Hayden Row, would remove traffic from the road. But that doesn't sound like right now we're doing the study of what's there, right? Like what's
well, he's
happening.
also got, because that's one of the reasons I asked later for the marathon too, because I want them to expand this so that they can have the current drop off and pickups for the marathon, so they can start to understand how it might all work on that one campus. Just from what I saw today, I was like, well, there's a problem right here, or at the intersection where the buses come in that doesn't really work, won't really work with what we've drawn, but that doesn't mean that it can't be adjusted to do so.
Okay.
But yeah, we're going to expand out to this, to have that lens.
So the orange, I guess where I was trying to go was, why is it orange for Hayden Row if the idea is that we're designing hopefully a way that pulls some of that off? So we end up maybe neutral, but is it really going to be worse? Like, is it going to be really, like, I guess that's what I'm trying to understand is it going to be orange or are we making it a little better?
We're pulling it off from a queue perspective, but
Yeah.
we're presumably, like all those cars that we're going down, and it's gonna, again, there's some crossover of kids at both schools, but they have to get there somehow, right? So we are putting, if we choose that site, there's that many more cars that are at least traveling Hayden Row down that stretch, even though they're not like queuing up and creating the backup that occurs at the high school.
Right.
There's
That's
still
what I was thinking
presumably
of in terms of traffic. Okay.
you know, a number of more cars that have to go that route.
Right, the traffic is a big topic, right, in general, and that could mean a lot of different things. So for the purpose of the matrix, we kind of broke off, to John's point, the on-site circulation with the assumption that we don't have a tail that leads back into the road. And so traffic in this case focused more on the broader network of the thoroughfare and the arrival sequence and exit from the campuses themselves. So essentially the intersection of the public road to the campuses and how the network gets to the campuses. And it was orange because we're shifting a volume of traffic from Elmwood to Hayden Row at a time that already has a heavy volume of traffic. And so between Elmwood and Hayden Row, there was a negative effect of shifting some traffic associated with that.
Okay.
And you know, the fourth grade is a neutral shift, right, because they're already up here. So again, for this standpoint, it's more the 2-3 scenario, but there are implications about 2-3 and 2-4 that are subtopics within the traffic, you know, umbrella.
So one of the other factors to keep in mind when you do the Elmwood site, and now you've recombined the buses between Marathon and Elmwood, we prioritize the buses coming in and out, so we stop Hayden Row multiple times. Even right now, we stop Hayden Row multiple times for the buses to get from Hopkins over to Marathon. So just that process itself, you know, starts to create a longer and longer traffic backup. If they were all to be on campus and now the buses are going from school to school within the site, we're no longer stopping Hayden Row, because stopping Hayden Row also adds to the traffic. So putting them buried on site, we're no longer stopping Hayden Row until they all go out. So that's just another factor to keep in mind.
And I do think the unknown, I mean, I know it's unknown, but I mean, the running joke used to be like, which school do you go to and how fast can you get from one to the other, because you have kids in two separate buildings on the opposite sides of town. And there were large groups of people that were, you go here first and I'll go here first, and then we'll see who gets here first, and then next time, or first, and then next time we'll switch, and then we'll see which way is faster, and then everyone will go that. It was like, and I know it's continuing. The conversations are the same. Everybody, it's been going on for a long time. So I think if we eliminate that crosstown piece too, and I know it's an unknown. We don't know how many families have kids in both schools and how many actually drive, and that chunk of traffic is being pulled off of the streets as well. They'll go in, they'll get their kids, and they'll go home. So I think that's just something to keep in the back of the mind with traffic too. I think there's potential for it to be so much better if sort of, everything comes together and, buses aren't holding things up. People aren't trying to get, come around Pleasant Street on 2 wheels if you get the chance, because you got that little window that someone's going to let you in, because you got to go pick up your kid at Elmwood. That kind of stuff is going to be eliminated, which is a huge positive in so many ways. So, I mean, keep it orange, but I think it has potential to be better even than
That's
orange.
why, my head was kind of neutral. Like, no, it's not great, but we also don't really know what
Right.
it's going to be like.
It's
And it's probably going to be better than it is right now.
Too
So
crystal
that's why I
ball,
was
yeah.
like,
Yep.
but yeah.
I think, look, we got a bit of a preview at the last forum, but if we select the Hayden Row site, the amount of conversations that we have to have with the community about traffic,
Right.
Yeah.
and the amount of data that's going to be, I don't obviously know your project portfolio, but I would argue that we're probably going to need to do a lot more on traffic than your average project in terms of figuring out
Yeah.
what,
Yeah, we need
even
that
to the
coming in.
detail that we're talking about like how many, on average, how many parents that have a student at whatever we'll call this new Elmwood
buildings.
school will also have one at Marathon, and what does that mean? What is the timing on how often we stop Hayden Row for the buses, and what does the elimination of that do? I mean, this is the level of granularity that we're going to have to get to, and it would be much easier for us as a building committee if this project existed in a vacuum, but it doesn't. And it doesn't from a cost perspective. We have to make sure we're integrating that conversation with all the other work that's potentially going on in the schools. And it doesn't from a traffic perspective if we go with Hayden Row. So we do have to have those conversations, and we have to find a way to integrate them into discussions around what's going on at the high school and middle school, and efforts that are underway or will be underway, efforts that the town can make to help calm that traffic on Hayden Row, because the level to which this exists within an already existing ecosystem of traffic is significant. And I mean, honestly, I'd as much leave it orange on this matrix as anything, because if we made it yellow, most of the public is not going to believe us right now. And so we've got a lot more work to do if we choose this site to make sure that we can tell that story, so that, and in fairness, every single conversation I have had about the potential traffic impact at that site, including with several people who stayed at the forum to talk to me, it usually ends with the person who's against it gaining a better understanding of where there might be some efficiencies, or it might not be as bad as just dropping another school in the middle of Hayden Row. And so I think we can have that conversation, but it's going to be work.
I think the other piece is we're saying that the parking and on-site circulation is where it's the most advantageous. Like, that's where we're going to get a lot of that traffic off, and we've put that as bright green, right? That dark green color. I think that's where we're putting like our hopeful, like that will be part of the solution to Hayden Row. So we are already thinking about solutions to what we're considering and not an ideal situation. Are we going to have another conversation or update or email from the traffic engineer prior
he was
to
here today, so
the site selection?
Jeff and I talked earlier about possibly kind of rebringing this one up again next week, and like kind of having more information from him, or maybe even having him come, because we all are going to have a conversation with him about what the scope is going to be for his next step, because it's going to be, I've heard people want to go all the way out to Main Street, or all the way out this direction, or down other streets, and I think he needs to really understand from everybody here what we wanted to look at. Like, how far out is this? What operations is he going to look at? What other places? Because he was, when he said to this about even when I asked him to go look at these, he was like, oh, well, that wasn't really, I didn't know I needed to go look at the other. I looked at them from a cursory perspective, but I didn't know they were thinking of changing the time. Now I need to go see this because I didn't really put that together that they might move the 5th grade. What does that mean? So I think that the scope of this is he needs to really understand.
That's good. As I said probably 27 meetings ago, the traffic is going to be the single biggest issue. Even more so than the cost of the school. It's just going to, there's an opportunity for the people that are concerned about traffic to come out when we vote in the fall town meeting to appropriate the money for this. There's an opportunity for them to come out at the planning board level, and planning boards, that's what planning boards do. What are you going to do about the traffic? So we're going to go all over that then. And then of course, we're at town meeting when we finally, it either passes or not. And we have a giant pissing contest over traffic. So as I said 27 meetings ago, this guy that we hired to do the traffic has got to do his damn job. It's his job. And he's got to understand that in order to make this work, people have to understand that we're taking care of all the considerations to the best we can. If he does that, we'll be fine. I'm not a traffic expert, and I suspect there's probably no one here in this room, except for Bill, and can answer these kind of questions. This is the guy that went to school. This is the guy that has degrees. This isn't his first school. This isn't his first Hayden Row. So get his ass in line and get him working. That's all I'm saying.
If we could maybe get him here for next week and do an agenda item that we could just call traffic update, and then maybe if there are questions that again, I want to make sure we're I look at it more as if we can get questions or concepts out to him so that he's got more of a direct line into what the specific community issues are. I think that would be helpful. So I think we'll recognize that we want to see progress, but we're not going to have finished answers. But I think it would be good.
I think it'll probably be a lot like our budget process, right? It's transparency over time. Like, as long as people are seeing that we're constantly engaging, thinking about it, there's movement on the analysis of the traffic, we're taking it seriously, and people can see, what's happening over time. I think that'll be a huge positive.
Absolutely.
And I think being repetitive from agenda to agenda, we know that people aren't watching consistently, or they might check in every couple meetings, that we'll want to keep repeating what we have learned each time, even if we don't have anything new to add, but rather sharing what we already know for people who may just be tuning in for one time.
I will ask him.
Thank you.
Give him a maximum amount of time from right now.
So that's Hayden Rowe's side of the traffic, and we talked about that. On the traffic side of Elmwood, it's at the intersection of two busy roads. Cut through commuter traffic down Elm to get over to 495. There are improvements because we have the ability to add a second connection on Wood Street. What we haven't talked about is kind of exactly where that connection is. Like we've shown it where it exists today as the service lane road, but that could shift and slide it to be a different location. It could come in right at the gas line if that becomes more advantageous. The downside about Wood or Elm is there's not room for the pocket lane that we did at Marathon School. Marathon already has an existing pocket, and there's still areas where that could be extended further, although there are wetlands issues related to that, but you at least have the ability to do that. There may be some ability to do that on the Wood Street side or the Elm if we take away our land as part of the project and kind of shift that into the public way. So there is a consideration that could be done there to have a pocket turning lane if need be, but it's much shorter on Elm Street, and then, where is the driveway if you're doing a pocket lane on Wood Street is another consideration. If it's not in the direction of most of the traffic, we need to look at that. So if the traffic kind of comes down from the center of town and we made Wood the main entrance, there's room for, a decent sized pocket lane, less so on the Elmwood side because we have the abutters there on the corner.
I think my concern with Wood Street, and it would definitely be something that a traffic person would have to look at, is there are curves, right? And it's one of the faster streets. So if that comes out in one of the lower visibility areas because of a curve, that should not have a left turn, right? Like, so I think there's considerations there about visibility, about possible accidents based on turning, that we would need to look at. It might be that it's feasible, but only as a right lane out type road.
Great feedback. I think that's.
Unless you want to bite another one off.
I mean, I guess,
I'm just trying to think
I
we
guess
covered
my only,
everything.
I guess my only question on the Elmwood site, and this might be splitting hairs. So, because of the existing site the site constraints, like it feels like we have less flexibility of what we can do with Wood Street and Elm Street and those places. If we go with a 2-3-4, is the traffic impact really neutral, or is it orange?
At Elmwood? Or-
Yeah.
If you're adding another
Yeah,
200
it
kids.
could be, it could put Elmwood at orange potentially. If
Because
you're
then
adding
that-
another grade with that cross traffic that we just spent time discussing.
Yeah, I mean, everything we talked about the potential efficiencies of bringing the grades over to next to Marathon doesn't exist at Elmwood. We're just flat out adding a grade if we go with a 2-3-4.
Well, we have a car queue that doesn't exist right now.
True.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe that is what makes it.
It's a smaller queue though, right? That's why, and there's less parking.
To your point, I was thinking they should all be orange. but that just goes back to what Mike was saying.
It's a safety
During
thing.
school hours, if you go during drop off or pickup, you're going to sit there for 25, 30 minutes just to get through. You don't go there during drop off or pickup unless you're dropping off or picking.
Yeah.
That's it. So I would be comfortable making them all orange because I feel like just traffic sucks everywhere. It's just the way it is, you know?
Equally bad.
What's that?
They're all equally bad.
Yeah, they're all equally horrible. And it just is what it is. Everybody's favorite topic.
The other thing about those three is that it still creates this other issue with the fifth grade.
Sorry?
It still creates the other issue with the fifth grade. If you move 2-3-4 over to Elmwood, doesn't that still create this same thing that happens on Hayden Row? With this,
As far as
In
bus
terms-
the
in terms of shifting the
in terms
fifth
of
grade
shift
to
of that
the-
time,
to the
it still
middle school
happens over there, so
timeframe.
it still starts to stack on top of the high school, middle school. So maybe they all are orange, at least in the 2-4s, and maybe they're yellow in the 2-3s.
Yep.
I think that makes sense.
I think that's
Yeah.
a hopeful yellow.
Yeah, I know.
That's how I feel. It's like it's a hopeful
Put
yellow.
a yellow with fingers like
we're
this
moving, we're
icon
moving
on there.
stuff off the road, which is not off the road right now. So I feel like that's a
We talked about revisiting it next week. I mean,
yeah.
maybe there will
Yeah.
be
It
a decision
might be
that is
easier.
made
Yeah.
and
If
you
there's
can
more
adjust.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and these are all draft for discussion even after tonight, and well, until we get to your ultimate vote. Right, the decision of 2-3 to 2-4 will make a difference, and then we'll have more information on some of these other topics. And getting your feedback tonight is wonderful too, right? Because we can come back with answers even on the 13th when you get to your vote, if there are still open questions coming out of next week's meeting. So, I think breaking this into the two kind of site and then cost, schedule, construction are the appropriate ways to kind of break up this conversation. And you guys have done a great job kind of marshaling through it.
I would be, in addition to if the Vinod can make it next week, but I would be fully prepared to have this bar come back up for discussion next week too. I think our thoughts will continue to form.
I'll leave it colored in. We'll just
Yeah, I would not
we're gonna
grade it
color
up.
in
I
the
would
rest.
not
Right?
grade it
Color
until
in the
next
rest.
week. It's, yeah.
By the way, I appreciate how easy you're making a very hard conversation. like the coloration, the thought process behind this makes it really digestible when it is such a really hard, complex conversation we're really having. So it's much appreciated.
It's almost like they've done it before.
Right? Right?
Everyone gets hard at it. I'd lie if I didn't say that's true. It's, you know, the interesting thing is people are more engaged than even like 10, 15 years ago, which is a great thing, right? Back then it was just build the school, and now there's so many more people following along, and so it's good in that regard.
What was the thinking behind BR1 being orange versus yellow like the others?
No, because BR1 is basically exactly what's there right now, which we know doesn't really work in a lot of ways. So we weren't even saying like we're gonna redo all like the parking. We're not fixing any.
We didn't add the road connection to Wood
No
Street. We
connection to
could
Wood
if you
Street,
want
yeah.
us to make it comparable. The BR1 is kind of a waste of time in a lot of ways, but the MSBA requires it. So we could argue about any of the things in the BR1 column because you could spend more money in that code reno.
Yeah, the logic was that the connection to Wood Street's not a code issue, and that there's certain things about the way the parking works and the circulation around the building, they're not code problems.
In my mind, I was comparing it to the current situation, which in my mind is neutral. So I'm like, why would it make it worse than what it is?
Well, that's the issue I was having with Hayden Row too, is in my head, the current situation is the yellow, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, orange was saying it was going to get worse. So that's why I was like, wait a sec. I didn't think it was going to get worse. I thought it was going to stay neutral, but that's not our guidepost, I guess.
The exercise is to look at the relative comparison of the options, and so that's how we grade this out, you know, based on how do these 8 options compare to each other more than the original baseline that you're all comfortable and know intimately.
And I think what we've talked about is, you know, our expectation isn't to have one site be all green. I don't think any site's ever that lucky, right?
Mhm.
So we're gonna have some of these things and we're gonna make compromises and trade-offs to say, well, this works better for this. So I think having some of these orange, like, I think we're acknowledging there is a current problem here and that, you know, we're gonna do our best to mitigate that. But, you know, I think it's not unique to Hopkinton, right? The drop off and pick up at schools. I'm sure it happens at
The school that I'm the principal at is a one-way. And the neighbors are not my best friends.
Yes. I'm sure, but even when I drop my own kids off at school,
it's
you know,
tough.
it's you know, it's a constant problem that I think every town or city struggles with. So we'll continue to struggle with it. Susan and I think both started here 6 years ago, and that was our first meeting with then Superintendent Kathy McLeod was, how do we fix the traffic? We were like, whoa. And it's been an ongoing conversation for the 6 years that we've been here. We just had one yesterday separate from this in just about our main campus. So it was a main point of focus for us in our interviews with both Vertex and Perkins when we, you know, pre-committee, when we were having those things, we said traffic's going to be an issue. That's why they were prepared for that kind of question and these questions to come up. So it's something that the schools have thought about for several years and will continue to try to figure out and get going, you know?
All right, I'll do sort of last call for any other questions or thoughts on the topics that we covered on this matrix tonight.
Just that it's a productive first pass. Feels good.
And then so that was those talking. Then next week we'll have cost, which the estimators are pricing it right now. And then we'll talk about the schedule durations and then impacts to the educational environment as well as loss of fields or interim conditions. Swing space, I guess that's the only one I wanted to touch a little on tonight. Right now we're going to price out a modular village that doesn't go anywhere. And so that's, you know, something we need to think about right now. Like, I think if we were building on the build in front, which is the bar option, you know, we can build within the project site, but the two that are on the existing footprint, whether it's an ad reno or the village option at Elmwood, require swing space. And so we can certainly price up what it costs to have a modular school and bring utilities to that, but I don't know where that modular school would go, you know, that there's, you know, because is there parcels in town that we should earmark, or we do, you know, I don't know how to leave that open, and we could just leave it open and we put it as just here's the cost. But, you know, as an example, you don't have a lot of property, but, you know, Fruit Street had property, but it's on the far edge of town, right? You could technically put a modular school there, but there's a lot of site work related to clearing that whole thing. So just as an example, I can tell you what it is to build a modular school, but I'm not really capturing the $2 million in leveling it and putting some temporary driveways and roadways and making sure there's signage or a temporary traffic light or all those things that could be needed for a temporary school in a location that's never had a school. So, you know, that's a preview for swing space. You know, I think, you know, that's the only one that's a little challenging in terms of the topics, and I'm sure there's no magic solution for where to put that. But
I guess we have to go through the costing exercise, right? I mean, but part of me does wonder about the utility of going through the costing exercise, because the simple answer on swing space is that's going to be read across the board. We don't have it. You know, I don't like. There's like, I can't think feasibly of any place where we could put a modular school for a period of time. So I think we go through the exercise because we have to do our due diligence. But I think anybody can jump in if they disagree, but I feel like that's going to be one of those that's going to significantly impact a couple of those options because we legitimately don't have swing space.
Absolutely.
Moving the kids for 3 years is crazy in my mind.
Well,
So I'm totally cool if we get rid of that one.
I was going to say, moving the kids for 3 years, and that assumes we have anywhere to move them.
Right.
Like,
It's just everything about that seems
Yeah.
just
Right.
bizarrely impossible to me. So.
And as a school committee member,
Oh.
the costs of our upcoming capital budget stuff,
But let's
like
level
adding
a
more
lot
to
and add
that,
a couple tents
yeah.
for the kids to go to school.
But I think again, I think, and so like my immediate reaction in my head was, why are you even going to do the cost estimating? But I think
We have to.
we have
Due
to
diligence.
because we have to. Again, this has to all be
Yeah.
chapters in a story,
Yep.
and
Yep.
that's one of them that says, look, swing space alone would cost this amount of money, and we don't have anywhere to put it. So that's something people need to know.
People are gonna just, I think, probably bring it up, like, why isn't center school a swing space?
So many reasons.
We could just let
There
them
are
go
so
inside.
many reasons, I'm
Well,
not saying
and
it's a
3 years
viable
over
option.
there would be, I mean, what they were dealing with when that school closed was so awful
was
with
so
water
awful.
and.
Oh, yeah.
And the space has not been maintained.
Yeah.
So the amount of renovation we would have to do to make it into
Oh,
a swing
yes.
space.
And we really stripped it bare. I mean, Elmwood took all the whiteboards and everything that we could. It was strict.
I mean, the town has shut down the building.
Yeah.
So you couldn't walk in there today and even put an office. So
But you're right. People are going to ask.
They're gonna ask,
They're
we
gonna
just,
ask.
we just,
Yep.
we know this.
Absolutely.
We're gonna
But we
get-
should be,
yep.
again, just transparent
Absolutely.
about it, yeah.
no,
Yeah, we
but-
should probably all come up with a mental list of the places
Yeah, just,
people are going
you
to ask
know.
about, right? The South Street building.
I was just gonna say
Yeah.
the South Street building, that was the
yeah.
other one.
Yeah.
Is there a building on like over by EMC that's vacant that they can
The one
use
that
for
they
temporary
moved the town
use?
hall over to
Yeah.
Yep.
temporarily.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so
Big
that-
modular village on the common.
all that'll be important to, you know, have the conversation as you're doing now next week, you know, flush that out for the viewers at home, because
Yeah.
those questions will come up again and again, like Mike said, at town meeting and all those other places, people are gonna ask why. And, you know, South Street as a great example is, they see an empty building, like, that'd be a great school. It's like, but the floor plan is so deep, and you want windows for the kids, and, you know, there's requirements and head heights and clearance, and it just doesn't work for the change of use from a school, because you still need a gymnasium type space, and that's not provided for in an office park, right? right? And so, but these are the conversations that it's important to have so that you guys know it, you can bring that back to the public and we can record it.
I think that one is actually a really interesting one to delve into because there's a lot, not as a viable option, but there's a lot of these charter schools and stuff that are reusing like mall buildings and like supermarket buildings and stuff to become schools. So I'm sure in people's minds there is this, well, that school did it in this supermarket space, so that space is a lot bigger, why can't we do it over there, right? So yeah, I think that would be, unlike some of the other ones which I think we can cut pretty easily and just have a very clean answer, I think that one we might need to like elaborate on a little bit.
No, it's a great comment because it's come up a lot in the last couple of years. Like charter schools can build it so much cheaper, and it's hard to straight face say, well, it's because you don't know how long they're going to be around for, and it's the reality of it. But it's hard to say that because it's government funded projects. But they all got together, decided we wanted to create a school, and it's not a town that are still going to be here in 50 years when the building needs to get replaced. They're on the short-term horizon of a 20-year build, not your horizon of a 50-year build. And that is the real driving difference, but nobody really wants to say that, because everybody wants them to succeed. We want them to be good, but it's a different playing field.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you for all the work that went into that, and we'll continue to go into it. We appreciate that. So I think the last item is just my every meeting review of upcoming meetings. So the next ESBC meeting will be next Tuesday, same time, February 7th at 6 p.m. right here at HCAM, where we will, among other things, go over the second half of that criteria list and have similar discussion on those topics. Worth noting that the school committee meeting will be discussing and I think deciding on grade configuration this Thursday, February 2nd at 6.
Usually our meetings are
6:30? 7.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we only do 6 if we have executive.
Okay. All right. 7 o'clock Thursday, February 2nd. Here, we're tuning in for that. And then the ESBC will meet again on February 13th, which is a Monday, so a little different than our normal cadence. And at that meeting, there will be further discussion of site options and, most importantly, a vote for the committee's preferred site option to move forward with in the PSR submission. I think that's it. And then after the 13th, the ESBC will be off until March. Hopefully.
Last day, the 1st. We have to get back together on the 1st to vote the package that goes in.
It's still March. Yeah. I said March.
You're going to be busy because we're going to go around to the school committee and stuff.
You'll be 18 hours into March. Okay, then if there is nothing else, I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Leah. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jagroot, and we will do this as a roll call vote. Jagroot?
Yes.
Tiffany?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes, sir.
Leah?
Yes.
I'm skipping Jen on purpose this time because Leah is technically the voting member now. I just want everybody at home to know that I'm not skipping you accidentally again. And Bill?
Yes.
Okay, and I am a yes, so it's unanimous, and we are adjourned at 7:55. Thank you to HCAM, thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you next week.